What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Hope you're all doing well. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to click here on another video. And today we're going to be talking about a brand new film coming to the horror streaming service Shudder on April 11th. That's part of their halfway to Halloween lineup. And this film is called Shadow of God. Directed by Michael Peterson and written by Tim Cairo, this film stars people like Mark O'Brien, Jacqueline Byers, Shaun, Johnston, and many more. And before we get too far into this video, if you guys are a fan of early reviews like this, up-to-date reviews, retrospective reviews, live streams, and the occasional vlog, then you guys are in the right place, and I'd like to ask you to consider subscribing. But if you're a returning viewer, as usual, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to click here on another video. And as I already mentioned, we're talking about Shadow of God, which is part of Shudder's new lineup of halfway to Halloween movies. Last week, I covered their film 825 Forest Road, and now we're talking about Shadow of God, which hits their streaming service on the 11th of April. So if you're coming to this review after you've already seen the film, feel free to leave me some comments down below letting me know what you thought about the film. But before we get into my personal thoughts on the film, let's get into what this film is all about. Shadow of God focuses on the character of Mason Harper, played by Mark O'Brien, who's coming back to his hometown after being an exorcist and after some pretty rough things have happened in some of these exorcisms. He's come back home to find that his father, who he believed to have been passed away, is now back suddenly, only to discover that his father might be possessed by some sort of divine entity, possibly God, and finds himself in the crosshairs of a bunch of religious radicalists. That's the base gist of this film. I read the synopsis on IMDb and I didn't really feel like it was a one-for-one for what I felt the film was really about, so I decided to kind of say it in my own way. That's the base gist here. When we get to know this character, Mason Harper, played by Mark O'Brien, you get to learn pretty quickly that he has a bit of a troubled past. He doesn't have your traditional at-home trauma that he has from his parents, specifically his dad. But we learn that his dad was a bit out there in terms of his religious outlook, and he definitely treated Mason not the best, definitely tortured him in a lot of ways, and created this divide between him and his dad. But his dad did die right in front of him, so suddenly his dad is in front of him now, and he's kind of struggling with what to do, but he believes his dad is possessed by some sort of divine entity and decides to try to take it upon himself to do an unauthorized exorcism, which leads to a bunch of crazy things starting to happen, a demon that's in the mix as well, and like I already mentioned, a group of religious radicalists who are coming after him. Amidst all this as well, you also have an old love interest who's reintroduced into the story here, the character of Tanis Green, played by Jacqueline Byers. And as I was watching this movie, I was like, this girl looks super familiar, and it's because she was actually in that film Pray at the Devil or Pray for the Devil a few years ago, which I covered here on the channel. Not a horror film I really love, to be honest, but I remember her in it. I thought she was pretty solid in that movie. And I'll start this off by saying that our two main leads in the film, Mark O'Brien and Jacqueline Byers, are pretty solid here. I think their performances are pretty solid. And the father who's returning in this film, the character of Angus Harper, played by Shaun Johnston, is also pretty solid. I would say across the board, the performances are, enjoyable. They're serviceable enough. I think that they do what they need to do for the story. I do think this is a film that sometimes kind of works against the actors by having some dialogue that isn't the best. The script is a little bit messy, and I think that some of the dialogue exchanges between certain characters does come off a little bit clunky, but for the most part, I think that the actors do the best they can. And as I've said before, with a lot of these lower budget Shudder films that come out, I like to have a lot of grace. I like to look at these kind of films with a different lens. I want to try to appreciate the fact that they made a movie, which is cool in and of itself. So I do think that the performances here are solid, despite the fact that I think the dialogue is a little clunky. And I do appreciate a lot of the locations that were used as well in here. I think there is a great sense of scenery, and I like the town that they chose for this film. With all of that said, that's really unfortunately where my positives for this film kind of wrap up, because I found this film to be just a disaster narratively. I found it to be a mess. I didn't care about any of the characters. I didn't care about anything that was happening in this film. And ultimately, by the time we got 30-40 minutes into the film, I was like, this is just your run-of-the-mill, incredibly hollow horror film that you've seen so many times before. Now, what gives this film its own identity is, as I already mentioned, the father who's returned, who we believe to have been dead already, is supposedly maybe possessed by God, which is a different approach. We're usually possessed by a demon, and so they do approach God in a different way in this movie, leading to a third act that felt like you were dealing with like a final boss in a very cheesy video game. But I thought that definitely gave this film its own identity. But outside of that, this is a pretty standard horror film with all these standard traditional tropey elements that you come to expect in a demon possession, or in this case, a God possession horror film. There isn't really much on a character level. There isn't really much on a story level, and there isn't really much on a visual level that really does anything to elevate the material here. And there was just something like missing. It just felt like there was a lot of this film that was kind of just sitting on the editing room floor. It just felt like there was parts of this film that just felt like weren't there, that weren't really giving the added context. As I mentioned before, you have this enemy group of religious radicalists who are coming after our main character Mason and his father, and they don't really give a lot of context as to why they're doing this. You know, it's alluded to, you can kind of put the pieces together. I guess you can follow it enough, but it never really feels like it does enough for you as a viewer to just kind of give you a little explanation as to what the motivations of our characters are here. It just feels like things are happening for the sake of things happening. And by the time I looked at the runtime about 40-50 minutes in and only having like another 30-40 minutes in the movie, I thought to myself, what's really happening? What is the real motivation of these characters? Who are these characters really? Everything just felt very hollow and very one note. And it's really insane when I see a movie like this. It gives me a lot more appreciation for when I do watch a film that's in the hour 40 to hour 50 range, and you feel like you got so much story, you feel like you got so much character, you feel like you got so much that's unfolding, you have a true beginning, middle, and end that feels like it comes together and puts a bow on top and kisses you on the forehead, sending you on your way with a nice slap on the ass. And then you watch a movie like this, where you get more than halfway through the film and you just ultimately feel like what's really happened, like what of substance has really happened. I can tell you a couple of scenes that have happened, I can tell you what the general gist of the film is, but it doesn't really feel like an abundance has happened. And that's what I just kept feeling as we got to the end of Shadow of God. It isn't until the last like 15-20 minutes that things really ramped up and became a little bit more exciting to watch. I won't lie. Before that, I found myself kind of just dozing off. I found my eyes just feeling heavy. I never fell asleep or anything, but I just felt myself feeling bored. Like my mind wanted to do anything other than watching this movie. And it's a shame because, again, I do think that some of the performances here are solid. I do think there's some filmmaking that's solid and competent in this film, like the cinematography, like the sound design, like the musical score. I don't think this is a completely poorly made film, but when it comes down to the thing that I think is going to make people the most attached to a movie, you know, days, weeks, and months and years from now, is the story. And it just wasn't there. It just wasn't really there. There wasn't any characters that you'll ever kind of feel glued to. I think that this is going to be one of those movies that unfortunately hit Shudder, and a lot of people are either going to turn it off halfway, they're going to finish it and go or they're just never going to think about it again weeks or months or years later. It's just unfortunately just another film to throw into the never-ending vast sea of generic horror films that don't offer anything else, which is a shame. Again, I think that there's obviously some talented people involved in this film, but it just never really did anything for me. Not to mention also, one thing that always bugs me with movies is when you have a poster like this one that doesn't really showcase visuals like that in the movie whatsoever. Like what you see in the film in terms of the possession looks nothing like the poster. I don't even know who that is on the poster. I don't think that's a character in the movie, and that's something that always bugs me. I hate when you have a movie that the artwork of the film or any of the imagery of the film that they release that looks different and more creepy is never what you see in the film. Nobody looks contorted like that in the movie, and it's just like, why? Just why? Like, it makes you feel like you're gonna watch a creepier film. And as a horror film, I never felt scared. I never felt even a little bit of eerie creepiness. I never felt like, you know, the like goosebumpy feeling, like nothing. Like I felt like zero tension. I watched the film with a blank face 97% of the time, and the other few percent of the time I just kind of maybe laughed at how goofy some of these sequences are. I never felt scared. I never felt tense. And yeah, that's going to be my thoughts on Shadow of God. So are you planning on checking out Shadow of God on Shudder when it hits on April 11th? Or if you've already seen it, what did you think about it? Whatever the case may be, leave any and all comments down below, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.